Well, thank you so much, Zane, for joining me today. Super excited to chat about everything you and FedUp Foods are doing. I had a pre-conversation before we started recording, and I think using your skill set, your team's skill set to bring regenerative farming, sustainable farming, stewards of land, kind of really uplifting them to the private markets in a way, and having consumers able to interact with them. And then also on the other side, enabling future founders and emerging founders a place to go to start, their social impact brand, their social enterprise through the white label model. So before we get into FedUp Foods and everything amazing that you guys are building, talk a little bit about your journey up to this point. What led you to be in this world of, organic food, sustainable food, regenerative farming, all this. How'd you get to this point?
Well, first of all, Grant, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to share a little bit about what we do, and just giving gratitude to you and what you do and the questions you're asking, because the only way we continue to unfold this mess and get it into a space where everyone gets to a seat at the table, no matter what table you sit at, is by asking the questions. So lots of gratitude for you up front and the work that you're doing. My journey into FedUp Foods was a rather peculiar one. I started in global real estate development. I was there for a while. I worked in entertainment from a public relations perspective, with some of the fun pop music sensations that probably are no more poppy. And was able to be a part of that scene for a while, and then started looking at, like, what does it mean to build homes? What does it mean to have shelter? And it was a really fascinating amount of work, and I loved doing it. We would take old places and redesign them and recreate them, 15th, 16th, 17th century places, and people would be able to come and stay, and it was great. But then I woke up one day and I was like, if I die today, what did I really do? What system was I supporting? Was I supporting, a place where more people can follow their bliss and do the things they want to do, and show up in the way for their families and communities that they want to? Or am I just creating silos that are not connected to the way everything works? And even though there were some green practices we were trying to do and stuff like that, you would sell a building or you would sell a property, and then the next person who would get it would just undo everything you did. It was just it was hard. So I actually, the joke for a while was that so I was living in between Orlando and London, and traveling quite a bit. And when I left, the whisper campaign was that I had a nervous breakdown, and I didn't have a breakdown. I had a breakthrough, and I actually ended up
Big difference.
And so I ended up relocating to Asheville, North Carolina. I'd always wanted to move to this part of the world, mainly because it's got incredible resources. It still has 4 seasons. It's one of the few places in the United States that has its own, what I call, cultural vernacular of a people that have, that still share their stories through hymns, that still share their stories through storytelling, that have a particular aesthetic around, I guess I'd consider, like, the outside world, right? Like all of the nature that kind of abounds you, and it's really rooted and interconnected, and it's not from a pseudo-spiritual kind of situation. It's just more of, you are in this place that for the most part has been really hard to, like, get connected to the rest of the world, to the rest of the United States. It's very isolated in that way because of the terrain. So if you live here, you're here, and you figure out how to work with the land, you figure out and understand the pattern. So that was something that was really resonating with where I was and what I wanted to do, and where I wanted to build a family and be in the future, against a world that's rapidly changing due to climate change. And so I got here, and I was working with a couple businesses at the time, and my specialty in particular is like enterprise strategy, really deep into the marketing capacity capability piece of what it means to take a ethereal concept of a product and or thing and or service and marry it to, like, the various different dimensions of tone and voice and essence, tonality, all those pieces that help create what we think of as a brand and service, and then allow that kind of to go into the world, and then bring people in and have a conversation, and then you engage, and people use energy to engage with it, and energy that's easy for most people are dollars. And so to be able to create this, this really cool marketplace around intentional thought, intentional brands. And so I was doing that in Asheville and meeting some really phenomenal people. And I really decided at that point in my life I wanted to build the fundamentals for community. And I think of community not as a destination. I really, really do think it's a process, right? It's a process of people. It's a process of people in place. And so that was foremost in my mind. And it was the time in my life where I felt like I could really do that. So that was 14 years ago. And then from that point on, it just kind of snowballed into putting out this, kind of feelers, or, you put your antenna up around like,
Sure.
who are the
Sure.
people who kind of get what it means to be working in and around business, for lack of better words, to be really aware, have a sense of awareness of what it means to build and make product with people who also value connection, value community, value the fact that they actually live in this planet, and what they do is directly related to how we thrive, and how we kind of live as a people, as a race of people. And so I started to kind of, those people started to come into my orbit, and I started to intersect with their orbit. And along that way, it's amazing. I always say I live in the epicenter of social impact in this place. And it's the most bizarre thing, because you would think people would go to like big time California, banging San Fran, hanging out LA, popping the rock in New York City for all these interconnections, especially in social change for California. But let me tell you, man, there's so much nexus of like super sweet people, from artists to people who have high capital, high net worth, that have made the energy of the dollar and are reinvesting that and building a deeper fabric around who we are and what it means to actually have engagement and interaction and intersection, where we use money as a means to keep our promises and keep our agreements, right? So there's these great people here. And then I ended up meeting this lady who started a water company here called Blue Moon Water. Really cool story around Blue Moon is another day, but it's a gravity-fed spring water in a small town in Yancey County. And we were trying to think about, like, how do you scale a water company? And I had not scaled a water company. I wasn't in beverage, but the principles are very similar. It's kind of like the tactics and strategies and thought processes are rooted in similar ideas and concepts. And so we were thinking about that. And the model is that we were going to try to return the water to the people and make water the new oil, right? Like, how can you share profits of this, really, super incredible resource that has a high value on it? So we put this business model together to do that. And we were working with each other. Then come along these two ladies, which I call them my hippie mamas, from a lack of, that's how they were described to me when I met them, first met them. And the lady said, these two hippie mamas came into the store today, and they make kombucha. Kombucha. I was like, oh, yeah, kombucha. She was like, yeah, they want to buy my water. They want to buy the water. And I was like, this is great. Like, gravity fed spring water into kombucha. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Right.
Yeah.
And it was so funny because she was like, yeah, I don't know what it is, but I would love for you to talk to them. Maybe there's something that we can do. And I was like, well, I was intrigued already. And, at the time I had investigated raw vegan diets, and I've done all the diets. Let's just put it that way. I was an equal opportunity lover, and I was buying the t-shirts, doing all the things of all of the ones. And so at the time I was living in that world for a little bit. And
sure.
So I ended up meeting these two ladies. One's Jeannine Busher and one is Sarah Schomburg, and both were the ladies who decided to brew kombucha together. They met in their homeschool co-op, and it was love at first sight. And I decided I really want to work with them. And they had just met each other a few months before me. This is how it works. They both moved to Asheville around the same time I did. They came here for the same reason, around creating connection, community, and ability to engage. And Jeannine had decided that she's like, I'll just make some extra kombucha and sell it at the farmer's market. And Sarah was like, and her husband were like, yeah, we should make kombucha. There's not a local kombucha, and then we should sell it at the farmer's market. They met in their kids' homeschool co-op, matchmaker, met it, put them together. And then 4 or 5 months later, they're wanting to go purchase water to like start making this stuff.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I meet them. And I was like, yes. And so, needless to say, the lady that I worked with Blue Moon Water and the water company, I was like, I'm going to have to like do this other thing because there was just more alignment with Sarah and Jeannine. And we came together, and Jeannine's partner, husband, Jeff, and at the time, Sarah's husband, now what I call parental partner. Ex-husband's never cool to say, but a parental partner. They have kids together. So,
Love it.
so we
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
jumped in together to start, brewing kombucha. And when we came together, we were like, look, it's not that all of us were, Jeff and I are pretty seasoned in the business worlds from, living in that
Yeah.
space, but the rest of them weren't. They were brewers. Sarah was a master mead maker. Nathan, Jeannine was an occupational therapist, and she was into Montessori. So she's a Montessori teacher. So there was no like, we're going to come together and be this kombucha company and make billions of dollars. There was none of that. It was just, we really think there should be an alternative in the market for a lower sugar, better for you product that our kids and the people that we are in and work with in this community should have a local opportunity and just be able to, like,
Yeah.
what does that look like if we brewed? What does it look like if we added medicine into our kombucha? What does it look like if we learn how to do this really well? And so that's
Yeah.
how it started. And that little tiny seed, we
Mhm.
put a name on it, and I branded it with everyone. And, Buchi, the name Buchi existed before I met the girls. And we just married that to a whole another idea set. And then that's what's anchored our kind of like evolution over for like 14.
Wow.
So we're 14 years old now.
Wow. So that leads sort of into FedUp Foods and kind of looking at what sort of Bucci did, or what their sort of ethos,
Yeah.
is,
Hmm.
and saying, okay, how can we provide that opportunity to others,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
like Jeannine, and like there's probably others out there,
Yeah.
right, that want to build better companies, right?
Hmm.
Or for whether it's for themselves, for their children, just for humanity as a whole, right? We can kind of do this better, right?
Right.
But issue, I think, with, like we had spoken previously, just about, getting it down to a price point where people can afford it, right? Like, how do we make healthy affordable? And we need scale. And to me, what I love about what FedUp Foods does, it sort of really brings everybody together, right? It brings the community of entrepreneurs together, farmers together.
Yeah.
How do we create something that we can then package eco-friendly even, and then send it to consumers, right? Who, like me,
Yeah.
search for this stuff.
Yeah.
And, I go out of my way to just try to, even if it is more expensive right now, like it's still only like $1 more, right? Or something like
Hmm.
that. And it will get lower, right?
Yeah.
But I think having that accessibility to these products,
Yeah.
right, to these brands is so important. And that's been the real hurdle I've seen.
Yeah. Yeah.
All that to say
Yeah.
is, talk about like FedUp Foods, like when somebody asks you about it,
Yeah.
like how do you talk about, like, how do you state its sort of mission and vision?
Yeah, no, as you were talking about access, like all the things were ringing, a chorus of bells in my mind. So in order to answer that, I'm gonna frame it from, as the brand continued to grow, we begin to realize that if we really wanted to live the mission and vision, if we really wanted more people to have really incredible beverages, if we really wanted really wonderful inputs to make it into the soil and then into the product itself, like what would have to change? Because, like you said, from conventional agriculture, from that perspective, it's all about demand, 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 demand. The more you buy, the cheaper it gets. It's a fascinating thing humans do. In order to do that, they believe that, then I say they, I mean the energies of mass construct and infrastructure that provide the narrative that says, in order for you to provide something at a price that's affordable, it's got to be low grade, low octane,
Right.
ingredients, low octane food, right? That's the only way, because it's got to be processed and we know how to put things in bottle. And so when we started looking at that, we've always been super active in and around the social space of humans and what humans are doing and where humans are living and eating and sleeping and how they're making laws and trying to conduct themselves like a human. So we were always involved in that space. And so we said we wanted to root that together. So we went in and merged with another kombucha company, I'd say about 6-7 years ago, Capital Kombucha, because I'm introducing Andreas, who's an important part of the FedUp Foods piece and what we do. And so we met Andreas Schneider, who is based out of Hudson, and a really cool ass vibe. Hudson's just a cool ass city anyway. It's kind of a sister city to Asheville, similar root system going on. And so he came and we met at a trade association. We helped found there's lots of fun bits here. So we helped found the Kombucha Brewers International, which is the trade group anchored in the United States, but is now global. Because you remember back in 2010 when they had all that kombucha issue and someone had a wrist bracelet or what all the nonsense was about. Anyway, basically, fermented foods go over 0.5% sometimes in alcohol. And at the time, it was just a bunch of homebrewers trying to do something at a commercial scale. So there was no commercial brewing places, as it were, with like a really set, program, like here's the protocols, here's how you do this. And by nature, kombucha wants to be a little bit more alcoholic because it's yeast and bacteria. You can actually figure out a biological process, spoiler alert, we did, that allow you to make kombucha that's below 0.5%. But at the time, it was like, the regulators were like, this is alcoholic, we have to pull it off the shelves. Whole Foods pulled it off the shelf. Instead of like, figuring out a way to bring consensus in the group of brewers, they were just so afraid that people were gonna, get botulism or something and die. And so, or babies would be like, 5-year-old would be in the middle of Whole Foods and they'd be drunk, like that was a real thing. They really thought that. So we pulled folks together. Hannah, who serves as the executive director for the Kombucha Brewers International still to this day, and I came when I was a founder, and there's some other cool grandpas and grandladies that came into play and began to hold the space. GTS Kombucha, GT Dave, he came in as a founding member. And so we all just said, hey, look, we got to figure out how to regulate the cats up in our place, because pretty much like they are going to stop us from selling this thing. And there's a lot of forces involved. Soda doesn't like it. Right? Like the juice companies are like, what is this weird stuff? So we are this very weird thing. And still that environment exists. Not as bad, but it was then. And so we came together from that place. And so when FedUp Foods began to emerge out of the brand, our work was really tied to 3 simple things, I always like to say. One is the inner soil. We wanted to create a space where the inner soil was nurtured and invested in. And the inner soil is who we are as a people and how we identify and how we show up for ourselves and our community. The second soil, as we call it, it's our social soil, right? It's the social soil of, if we know who we are as a person, then we begin to interact with the social fabric around us. And that can be the group of humans that we call the human race that we work with and play with. And the idea there is like the social soil isn't just inputs that feel like, look like, sound like me, but it's all the diversity of all of those pieces, no matter what they are. Some of them are into limiting the idea of human expression, and some are very much into giving opportunity for human expression. It doesn't matter, it's all in the soil. You can't, when you're working with work in the soil, you can't decide, I only want to work with this little piece of the soil. It doesn't work that way, right? You got to work with the stones and the rocks and the bark and everything. It's got to, and there's a way where you can do that. And so for us, that was really important. Like that second soil is the social soil. And then the third soil, in a very real way, is the microbiological soil, which is how do we work with that element within our business? Meaning, how do we nurture the relationships that are directly connected to putting incredible inputs into the soil that grow really incredible food, ingredients, as we call them. I love how we move it from food to just ingredients, but these things that we use to make finished products. So those are the 3 pillars that kind of have built FedUp Foods. Is how do we do business that, one, nurtures the inner soil, nurtures the social soil, and nurtures our microbiological soil. That's a little bit heady in the corporate world. So we decided to line it up with people, planet, profit. So it was easy. So we think about the social soil as what's the means at which we create and how do we do that? And I like to shift profit and I'm one of those weird people where words matter. So I like to call it people, planet, and prosperity, because I think that
Mm,
there's this
yeah.
idea that there has to be a cost mechanism that doesn't feel good. And only thing that feels good in that is the profit that's shared, where when you create prosperity, there is no idea it's hurtful to pay for important ingredients, because when you're prosperous, you're going to have the financial whereabouts to do it. You're also going to be doing things that celebrate the land. So we like to use people, prosperity, and planet. And that's what kind of is the platform that creates our vision. And our vision is really, really simple. It's to nurture life.
The next questions I have is really from, the business side, because it's really interesting now because you've kind of taken your real estate background a little
Yeah.
bit and put that into, hey, how do we actually, I love not depending on
Yeah.
different like areas, whether it's people, whether it's traditional business models, traditional people in the supply chain, like how do we create our own thing? And I
Mm-hmm.
think you guys are buying
Mm-hmm.
land, restoring
Mm-hmm.
it, putting your breweries on these
Yeah.
lands. Like to me, that's also a really hard thing to
Yeah.
do.
It is.
But it's how you build those three pillars that you're talking about, is that if you can integrate your philosophies into every part of what you do and not depend on certain outsized elements to hope that they care about what you care about, it's like we have a philosophy, we want to do this ourselves.
Yeah.
And so I love the idea of buying the land, but before
Yeah.
that, was being like a white label producer and empowering other brands and founders, was that always the idea? Or was it saying, hey, we're just going to kind of build Buchis in kind of different areas of the consumer marketplace?
Yeah.
Or like, I guess walk us
Yeah,
through
yeah,
that.
no, that's a good question. I mean, it's a little bit of both, right? Because we knew coming into it from operating in a branded space how difficult it was to compete, right?
Mm,
So you've got a
yeah.
couple pathways. You can either take in money from private equity. You
Mm-hmm.
can take in debt, a lot of debt, little private equity or a little bit of, stuff going on. And you can also decide that, you really want to be in control of how you bring money in your capital stack and orient your business in a way that you can continue to have the resources you need to achieve what you want to achieve. And one of those superheroes in my mind is Patagonia. Like they did a really brilliant job of
Mm-hmm.
being able to not just maintain control, but be able to hold the governance of their organization in a way that allowed them to flex into their mission. And so
Mm-hmm.
that was always really very clear in our mind. And so part of that was to create a business that was a little bit diversified in terms of assets. So it gave us an ability not
Yeah.
to be beholden to someone coming in and writing a big check. And anytime anyone writes a big check, rightfully so, they also want to like set the rules and set the stage and
Sure.
create the space that they're paying for. I get it. But we weren't interested in attempting to negotiate our mission and where we wanted to go with individuals who may not have been in alignment with that. And,
Yeah.
during I'd say over the past 20 years, but in particular, over the past 15 years, our impact investment has really shifted, right? Like it's gotten a lot more
Totally.
accessible. People who have
Yep.
money finally decided that money just wasn't the way to go, and they decided to reinvest that in the things that were life-giving. And then some people who were just like, I'm just like, pioneers like the Patagonia folks that were just like
Mm-hmm.
coming in and doing it. So we kind of looked at it from a perspective of how do we build a business model that allows us to retain our ability to live our vision, work our mission. How do we do that against the backdrop of a world that requires a lot of capital? Brands are intensive capital machines. They're also very
Mm-hmm.
limiting in who they speak to. Their voices are activated for a particular demographic and segment of people. So if you want to speak to a lot of people doing a lot of different things, you're going to have a brand that's going to be able to do that, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so we were like, that's a lot of money. And so the only way to do that is either take on a lot of debt or get a bunch of private equity money or wealth individuals, angel investors that want to put their money in. And so we were like, if we want to live our mission, get more people to drink more healthy foods, reinvigorate and bring incredible ingredients, quote unquote, and inputs into that process and scale that. The only way that we could figure to do it is we got to get over our ego. We got to let our brand be something that nurtured us, but wasn't the vehicle that we were going to scale because in truth, we didn't want to compete with our kombucha bros and sisters on the shelf. Like it's not fun. It's just not really fun. It's just like buy
Yeah.
me because
Yeah.
what
Hmm.
happens is it created a climate now where you've got different kombuchas that are attempting to accentuate a particular aspect of their brew. Some of them are very forthright in their labeling that it's actually authentic and, it's actually kombucha that you would believe would be, unpasteurized. Some are like trying to pass off a kombucha that's been pasteurized, which for the record, if you want to pasteurize kombucha, that's fine. You just got to tell people what it is. Like, don't try to make
Yeah.
something that's
Yeah.
other than that. I know a lot of people that are into it and they don't have to worry about it exploding or something. It's in their shelf. They like it. And it's still a step above soda, right? So it's all good. But there was
Mm.
it became this very intensive little brand against the big brand. And then it just became a place where
Hmm.
we were like,
Yeah.
do we want to input our time and energy into more of what we don't like in capitalism? Or are we going to get really clear, tuned in, tapped in, turned on about what we want to do? Do we begin to be in a place where we're not operating from I can't but because of that energy? Or are we going to get really clear about how do we feel when we're living and inspired and doing the work that really drives us? And so that's what we chose. We
Love it.
decided that that was where we wanted to be. And so our energy fell there. And so what began to open up for us was, we don't have to take in private equity money. We could actually start to like hone our expertise and do it really well and then make kombucha for other people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
It's so smart.
and it was like, we'll build an infrastructure that says, man, we know how to brew. We've spent years creating our scalable craft brew tech. We really understand our culture. We spent so much money in understanding the science and marrying that to the craft of brewing. Like we still use, air that's wild yeast that are just here in our bioregion that come into our cool ship, which is where we get all of our starter and create healthy mothers. We map our gene lines of our various scobies, and each of them have their own process in terms of things that they require. We know we have named each of them so that we can refer to them in our fermentation process. We understand what's in there. So we're like, why don't we take what we do really well and make it available? And so that's what we did. And so private label showed up in a way that said there was a real gap in the market. There wasn't a private label producer that was able to kind of capture the marketplace. There wasn't very few private label SKUs when we got into the business around it. And a lot of the programs that were executed poorly because it takes a lot of expertise to work with a living beverage and living food. It's just really different than
Yeah.
heating and putting it in a bottle. So we just said we're going to take that and we're going to amplify it. And our goal, and still is, and we're working every day at it, is to make our platform more available so that when you go into Black and brown communities or places where you've got a household with one woman and 3 kids or 4 kids working 3 or 4
Hmm.
jobs,
Hmm.
in places where they can't afford to spend a whole quote unquote whole paycheck in Whole Foods. Love you, Whole Foods, but you're definitely positioned
Sure.
for a group of people who want that access.
Yep.
We wanted to say, you should be able to roll up in anywhere and buy a delicious
Yeah.
kombucha that's organic, regenerative, fair trade. Totally can be done, or buy a probiotic soda that's regenerative and fair trade. Like you should be able to do that.
Yep.
That's what's really given the impetus around FedUp Foods, and the name FedUp serves two pieces. Like one is I'm fed up, like I'm nurtured, right? I feel good, like I'm fed up. You know what I mean?
It's double
Yeah, that's
entendre
what I'm
here coming. I
saying.
see.
Look,
Yeah.
Erica
Yeah.
Badu is inspiring everybody. I love that sister. Anyway, so on the other side, from a very real space, is like we are really
Mm.
fed up with the extractive food system. It's
Yeah.
horrible. And it doesn't have
Yeah.
to be. It does not have to be. Food does not have to be hoarded out to its lowest common denominator and put junk in the bellies of people who we then expect to then be our police officers and our politicians and our
Yeah.
policymakers,
Mm.
our
Our
teachers.
teachers.
Like, how do we nurture our
Yeah.
people if we're feeding them junk and garbage? How do you wake up to be inspired, tuned in, tapped on, turned in? How do you have that when you have nutrient deficiency literally in the food
Yeah.
that's on your shelf? How is it okay that you don't have when you walk into a store that isn't built in a place that can afford all the opulence? How can you expect individuals who are buying nothing but some sugar and some fake coloring and some processed tomato or whatever it is to actually do well, do better. It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
So either it's an intention of the system to keep everyone in this locked mentality so that you don't actually have access to real living nutrient dense food so that you can continue to go do the work, boom, 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 make the thing, not actually to live in the full abundance of who you are. Or we just haven't found a way to make the intersection happen. And so I'd like to hope and think we haven't found a way to make the intersection happen.
I
You know
think
what
it's
I
the
mean?
latter. I do. I think it's the latter because we've, like you said, we've created a food system where it's
Yeah,
monocultured and it's incredibly
correct.
extractive. Those two things just literally aren't
They aren't.
sustainable. Not even from a climate perspective, just from a
Yeah,
capitalism business
right.
perspective. Because at some point, the land is going to say no. You're going to have to keep pumping more and more fertilizer in it, and at some point, that is not going to work. That is going to become just as you said with the kombucha side, where they thought people were going to get drunk in the aisles. Because you're really going to start to see people get really, really sick from eating food, and it's already
Yeah,
happened, right? I mean, we are not a very healthy
exactly.
nation,
And what you said
and
was so true, Grant, around it's how I think about it. It's like if you go to any PE, if you go to any investment firm and you bring your money to them, they're going to talk to you about this diversification of portfolio. You got to have all these diverse assets because you don't want to. And I'm like, hey, if you take that same mentality and think about your soil and think about your food and think about how it's grown, then you would really like be able to benefit so much more if you just used a simple concept that says if you diversify it and bring all of these inputs in so that the system can stand on its own like it has for millions of years. We love to I love when craft was a thing. So we say craft kombucha or craft beer. Do you remember that when like craft was like
sure,
the craft colored paper against black and it was like craft wood. That there's this one thing. I think
yeah,
I forget which podcast I saw it or what it was, where it was like this whole like deep, thoughtfulness around all of that. And what was really beautiful around that is that people really value slow food. They value things that are intentionally done and and artfully inspired because they tend to taste better. You go to slow food or farm to table restaurants, the best restaurants you can go to, they're always the most expensive because they have the most incredible food. So, even in that model alone, I'm like, why this restaurant is doing, you want to know why Gordon Ramsay does really well is because he's buying incredible produce, he's buying incredible foods, he's putting out, and people are like, oh, I love this restaurant. Oh, it's so amazing. Like, why? Yes. Let's do more of that.
One thing we mentioned earlier, and it's obviously a massive topic, is
Yeah.
affordability. You had mentioned before that regenerative, fair trade, organic, we associate it with almost
Yeah.
luxury, right? And that it's not
Right.
attainable for much of the population. But you said it
Yeah.
is, right? At a certain point, at a
Sure.
certain scale. Like, how do we get to that point? And is it possible? And what kind of scale is sort of necessary? And maybe where are we at in that timeline of kind of making it where it is at least maybe it's only 50 cents
Right.
more, right? Or 35 cents more, right? That matters.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's complicated only because I think and I include myself in that the system of us as humans and how we engage tends to place a lot of this is how we used to do it versus this is how we can. So I think that's a very real energy in the system that has to that has to be transmuted in a lot of ways because let's just say, for example, the largest retail brand on the planet was Kirkland Signature. They're the largest retail brand. What is Kirkland
Wow.
Signature? It is the private label for Costco. It's the largest retail brand.
Wow.
So they are the largest seller of wine on the planet. They are crazy, right? So let's just say, for example, Kirkland Signature were deciding to say, we're going to really focus where we want 50% of our suppliers to work with regenerative partners. We really believe that if we can take the might of our marketplace and begin to work with those suppliers, we'll have a massive impact both in farming practices and all that. So what does that mean? That means that individuals who aren't farming with regenerative practices now have to learn how to do that. That means conventional farms that have been doing things in the conventional way are going to have to retool their system into what would be considered a slower food process, meaning that we're going to have to like slow down the amount of yield. And here's where I'm going with that. Instead of basing everything on scarcity, right? On like, if you do more, blah, 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 blah. So you like, everyone's got to have more, 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 more. You got to have more demand, more demand, more demand. And that's how we price things, right? If it's really, really affordable, that means it's in a lot of places, right? Because it's been scaled. If we flip that on its head and say, instead of us actually charging per pound, so instead of you getting like 3 pounds of bananas and it being 48 cents per pound of bananas, and then you can buy more bananas, what if we did and measured our food based on its food density? What if we said, do you really need to eat 10 tomatoes, or could you just eat 3 because the level of nutrient density is what you need? Could you actually begin to think about those food places where more nutrient grown items provide more nutrient density in the food? Now, everything won't be able to be at that level, but if we started to approach it from that, instead of saying we make more money when we sell more things, into we actually make good margin, good money when we sell really good inputs, and then we amplify that. And so there's a lot of great work that's been done. One of the groups that I really, really love to work with that we've connected to, they're based out of Hudson. They do a lot of work around what does it think about being in soil, and how does that soil feed regenerative farming, especially around cattle farming and dairy. Hawthorne Valley Farms is a biodynamic organic farm that does regenerative farming and dairy for a long time. They've been working and thinking about that, and they've been able to support their dairy and their dairy operation, the butter and the milk and the yogurts and the things that are provided out of there, through regenerative, biodynamically, organically grown, grasses and cows that consume them. And we can totally do it. There is obviously, it's not going to flip over overnight, right? Like nothing does. But if we actually begin to put ourselves into a place that creates more access in terms of farmers being able to do it and then people being able to buy it, we shift it. If you actually can start to create the infrastructure around conventional, and so we've got a lot of, like, with the regenerative certification that's coming on board, I think that's attempting to help create a measure. I don't necessarily know that another certification program is going to shift everything, but it does create the space for the conversation to happen. It does create a value add. A lot of farmers around here have grown regeneratively for years and years and years and years. That's just what they know how to do, because food trucks weren't running every day, right? So they had to grow their own produce. They had to grow their own items. And those practices can be done, and it allows them to kind of have inputs in there. And then, organic as well has the ability to lean into regeneration as well, and not just have someone have a conventional plot growing corn and then a little square that's doing.
Yeah, no, they're not. Unfortunately, they're not a swing state, right? Like Iowa, right? And if it were, you would have, instead of this topic of corn being brought up every year, the idea of regenerative farming and this more healthy approach to food would be talked about every single year.
Exactly.
But it's geographically screwed because we have this archaic
what if we had, what if we had, instead of the sugar and the corn subsidies, which, I think corn subsidies.
This was my other question. Was, we have these bills, we have these subsidies come out for, whether it's EVs and electric cars, whether it's oil subsidies, whether it's corn subsidies, is there anything that could excel the process where we have subsidies for these farmers to say, hey, we don't want a monocrop anymore. We want to revitalize this land, but it's going to take investment, right? It's going to take some years to kind of do this. Is there an ability for, subsidies to play a role in the transformation of the supply chain that starts with the transformation of farmers, going from monocrops to multi-crop? These things will take time, but man, the domino effect of positivity
is huge. It's huge. And it's a space where I think there's so much room for little things that can really help shift the
Yeah.
conversation. Like, for example, our Secretary of Agriculture, they have a lot of scope in what they do. When Obama was in office,
Hmm.
they passed the Food Modernization Act, which is this huge attempt to realign the food system towards more safety, less outbreaks, and all of that kind of stuff. The spirit of it was attempting to get alignment around that. It was not very things that government they try to write really big things to do really big broad stuff, and it never ends up working really
Right.
well.
Right.
And so, as we call it, FSMA at this point is just now rolling through that level of like regulatory oversight is just now coming into play in a very real way over the past 2 years. And Obama's been out of office for a hot minute. And that was, I think, was in his
Yep.
first term. So, like you said, things take a long time. But let's just say, for example, in the Biden administration right now, if they're really excited and super focused on climate change, you don't have to hit climate change with a big, huge cudgel
Right.
that's going to create political
Right.
division and get people all
Yeah.
worried about carbon taxes and all that.
Yep.
Take it to the kitchen, right? There's some really clever things that we could do, in my opinion. I think the idea of the subsidy towards around regenerative farming practices or regeneratively grown ingredients could be prioritized and could be supported by saying, we want to give you money in order to like create this marketplace for us, because we think a regenerative
Right.
place is a really good spot to do it. One, we do a lot of things. We start to like reinvest in farmers. Our average age of our farmers, like what, 57 or 58 years old.
I know it's
It's
a
a huge
huge
problem. So
problem.
now we start making, being a farmer as cool and sexy as it is to be a lawyer, a doctor, or whatever. Two, we
Yep.
automatically take a lot of money and put it into the hands of creating more education, more opportunity, more access to resources to make it happen. And then three, voila, all of a sudden you have a marketplace that's beginning to be supported through regenerative farming that, guess what? Its very nature is a carbon sink. The fact that you're planting and
Yep.
growing topsoil and
Yep.
now capturing this actually achieves all of the nonsense, all of that talk and yakky, yakky, yakky is actually now lived in a really real way. And there's no one who can't say yes to that. We don't have to go into these big hypothetical things where, you want to do this because of the cow manure and all that. Just stop it. It's not stop, break it down in a really easy way that says
Yep.
you need money to invest into the system. Once you invest in the system, the return to the individuals, the businesses, the infrastructure, these places where farming has basically been eviscerated, that where climate is continuing to like wipe out people throughout the Midwest, throughout Florida, from flooding, from tornadoes, you name it. Actually put some
Yep.
thoughtfulness into that and like do simple, subtle moves inside there that you can actually control. And you'll find that rural people in places in the South who tend to lean a little bit more socially conservative will find deep value in the fact that you get where we're coming from and you marry that
Totally.
with progress. It's not that
Yep.
difficult. It really is not. It just
Right.
takes someone to like stop getting caught up in the winds of the divisiveness, because what I used to believe in, I think most people do, 90% of the things that we engage in our life, everyone wants. You want to be able to raise your family, you want to have a nice home, you want to have
Yep.
some savings, be able to go on vacation, you want to see your kids. Pretty much 90% of the things we want good food, we want safe places to live. 90% of
Hmm.
the things that are happening in our life we can agree with. Last time I checked in school, 90% was what? NA. And we spend all our time arguing about the 10%. That's what we do. So all of our time goes into the
Yeah.
10% of
Yeah.
all the things that we have that are differences in the way that we think. And it's not that they aren't important. 10% is important, but it's not as powerful as the 90% of the places where we can do a lot of work. And I'm energized by the 90%. And I'm hopeful we can do it.
Well, there's your future senator of North
Never,
Carolina, Zane Adams,
never.
everybody. I want to end on thank you so much for your time, man. I want to end on the last question around look, it seems like, just talking with you, this is going to
Yeah,
be your life's work, man. This is going to be what you work on for,
yeah.
for a really long
I need
time.
to. I'm already 14 years in, man. We
It's
just got to keep it going.
yeah, man, that's amazing. But when you look, let's just say, 5 years down the line, 3 to 5 years, I like that window because you could start to see some real results, but it's also near term enough where it's tangible. like what does goals and successes look like for FedUp in that 3 to 5 years? Is it building out that asset portfolio, buying land, making it regenerative, putting your breweries on this land? Is it, just building out, empowering founders around the country to build better products, have better strategies when releasing these items? I guess just talk us through maybe that 3 to 5 year vision and plan of goals that
All of
you
the
might have
above.
as a team.
I
Yeah.
think in 5 years, realistically, success for us is never really measured as a point in time, but our aptitude around achievement is a metric that we feel excited about. And so I think a metric of achievement for us is we're working on opening and landing a third facility. That's a very real thing for us. That third facility will allow us to attract mission aligned brands that are looking for operators and co-packers that are working with regenerative supply line ingredients and farmers. So one of those achievements would be that facility is up and it's at full capacity. It has a rich diversity of customers that range across the RTD space, so ready to drink space. An achievement would be continuing to nurture the retail buyers that we engage with every single day by utilizing what we call the FedUp Foods Summit or the FUF Summit, which will be our first year this year, and it's in a smaller salon style. But the idea is that people remove their name badges, check their egos at the door. No one knows where you work from a retailer perspective. We just are going to mix it with farmers,
Oh yeah.
manufacturers, distributors, and buyers to have a generative conversation around things they want to solve within the food system for their stores. Like, we have shorter inventory here. How do we think about bananas that are going to be, better and taste better for our customers? I want to roll out a whole salad line instead of buying from some other farm. Maybe me as a store can come in as an investor in a regenerative farming situation and now subsidize how tomatoes, cucumbers, and lettuces are grown, and I can put it in my own private label if I wanted to. So that would be something that would be
Yep.
well on its way and beginning to nurture itself. I think another earmarker of achievement for us would be, we have a lot of employees that, and I say a lot, for us, it's a lot. Probably it's still tiny in the big people world, but we have we have a little over 100 employees. I think about 107, 108 employees. I would love to see our growth continue to happen and abundance happen for them. And what that means is, more access to higher wages, more access to benefits, really deep, bigger, stronger 401ks. And we have those things now, but, we're trying to balance scale and all that at the same time. So, we'd love to be able to continue to have people who work with us both in Marshall, North Carolina and Irwin, Tennessee, and then wherever the third place is going to be, have more people there buying their own houses and being able to grow food, and to have a system within our company that actually supports that work, that actually says, hey, here's this $1,500 or $2,500 or whatever it is that's going to help you seed your farm at your place. We have a community garden right now for the employees. It would be amazing if we could have like a centrally community garden at one of our brewing facilities, either in Marshall or Irwin, Tennessee, that allows that to be grown. Gaia Foods does that for their team, and it's amazing what they do and the amount of crop that's grown. It has a full regenerative growing process, and they're able to harvest that food and give it to their team as part of their compensation package. That would be a really cool achievement. And then last but not least, in 5 years, it would be great for FedUp Foods to have a seat at the table with not only the retailers, but also those individuals in and around food policy as we begin to think about creating access for schools, in particular elementary, middle, and high schools that are in an institutional food program, to be able to talk about how to open up that very closed system to producers and manufacturers and growers that are offering and providing regeneratively grown inputs. Right now, it's so hard to be able to, it's a very closed situation. And if we actually open that up and begin the conversation there, my hope is that they'll begin to intersect with each other. And so the retail kind of market around food begins to meet the institutional market around food that's also receiving supply from regenerative farming practices or regeneratively based inputs, and then that scale is it's just there, and then it just starts to hype and grow. And I don't know, I love the subsidies for regenerative farmers. That would be something that'd be really cool. I don't know if we can do that in 5 years, but it would be nice to at least begin conversation in those places where those ideas could get some traction.
Well, you mentioned the summit real quick. Is that going to be this year? Or do you know when that's going to be? Is
Yeah,
that just an idea
so
right now?
it's probably going to be in September. We're trying to decide if it's going to be a
Okay.
virtual format or an in-person format. There's a lot of, we have to be elegant in the way that we do it so that we, provide safe space, because buyers don't want to be harassed. It's just the worst thing. Someone goes, "Hey, I got
Sure,
this
man.
new
Yeah. Yeah.
magic,
Like yeah.
cereal. Get away from me. I'm not doing that."
Yeah.
So to be able to have it so
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
they can come in and feel comfortable. They won't need to disclose who and what they work for, but then also marry it with, the farmer community that we work with right now is they're ready to kind of come and engage. Honestly,
Sure.
we're like one of the only manufacturers that are deep in private label that have a regenerative forward position in sourcing. That's a big deal. I think there's one other company, it's HPS or HBC. Anyway, they're a specialty. They do like dried powders and stuff like that. I think they have a real focus on regenerative, but
Gotcha.
we're
Yeah.
very like we're like we're
Trendsetters.
cowboys and cowgals out here.
Yeah.
Totally different
Love it,
land.
dude.
So that would
Love it.
be pretty phenomenal if that would actually be able to come into play.
Man, well, thank you so much, Zane, for taking the time. This has been an incredible
Definitely.
conversation. Over the next, 10, 20 years, man, I'm optimistic about this sort of stuff. But look, it's very difficult, very hard, right? Going up against behemoths in industry that has been standardized but a lot what you see with our economic system, financial system starting to get
Right.
digitized in a way, right? And having
Yeah.
that go through a transition, I think food is and not even food, but just farming, right? And treating our
Yeah.
land appropriately.
Yeah.
Let nature take its course, right? And let it feed us how
Hmm.
it's intended to do. I think is going to be much more top of mind. I think that transition, it's going to happen, man, because there's a lot of people wanting to work in it. There's a lot of people like
Yeah.
you and the team working on it. But I think you're going to see, just like you
Hmm.
took your talents to regenerative, right? You took your talents to this
Yeah.
side of
Yeah.
business. I think we're starting to see more people, young
Yeah.
people,
Yeah.
obviously going to lead the way, right? But those talents, instead of going to
Hmm.
a big company, right? Maybe going to a startup or going to companies like yours and bringing
Yes.
their talents. That to me is gonna
Absolutely.
help a
I
ton.
agree.
To have that
Yep.
strategic advising and business that
Yeah.
go towards this
Right.
stuff rather than going toward that
Man.
other stuff. I don't know, man.
I
That's
agree.
a
I
big
agree.
part of
Well,
this
I
as well.
appreciate your time so much, Grant, and sharing your thoughts. And I was able to dive into a lot of the other episodes that you've done. I appreciate your work and the ability to create a platform for conversation to happen, but also to bring a spotlight or a big, large flashlight onto businesses and people
Mm,
and the causes at which they work in and on this planet, and the reasons why they do, because it just allows the critical mass of awareness to grow even more. It gives us something to know that we're not the only ones in the room, and to
mm.
also put it forward that says our goal is not to be some exclusive little club of people who have these ideas. The idea is that everyone can be in this space. Everyone can operate in a way that says more access, more food, more abundance, more prosperity is completely possible when we bring ourselves into this convergence with one another as humans and decide that we are worth and our home